This is Polling Station with Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi. And I think, William, there's only one place to start this week. And if you let me, I was a bit hazy about what I would find at Peppa Pig World, but I loved it. Peppa Pig World is very much my kind of place. It has very safe streets, discipline in schools, a heavy emphasis on mass transit systems, I noticed, even if they are a bit stereotypical about Data Pig. And where do we go here? Oh God, the real lesson for me going to Peppa Pig World was about the power of UK creativity. Who would have believed a pig who looks like a Picasso-like hairdryer, pig that was rejected by the BBC, would now be exported to 180 countries and theme parks, both in America and China, as well as in the New Forest, and be a business worth at least 6 billion quid to this country and counting. I think this is pure genius, don't you? No government in the world, no Whitehall civil servant would have conceivably come up with Peppa. Now, I'm actually more amazed that Boris Johnson, in his little chat to business leaders, invoked the spirit of V.I. Lenin rather than his Peppa Pig stuff. But William, this was a hell of a way to start a week. Obviously, a lot of publicity about it. Senior spokespeople in Downing Street almost expressing reservations about the well-being of the Prime Minister. What can you tell us? We've had repercussions in the betting market in Star Sports.
We have. There have been some changes, and in fact, actually, I'll do a little experiment here. I don't know if this will display properly.
As was seen live on Twitter yesterday.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I hope you can see that and that my Zoom camera is just reversing it. But if you can't, let me tell you where we are with our odds at the moment. So Boris Johnson was 6-4 not to lead the Tories into the next general election yesterday. That price came under pressure. He's now 11-8. I think that's the shortest we've been on him not making it. He's 15-8 to go next year. I think that'll be the next price to come under pressure. The briefing continued, it did not go well. And it was pretty sort of extraordinary what people were seeing as well. Not just sort of externally, everybody's always taking shots at Boris Johnson. He's pretty used to it. He bounces off it. And to be honest with you, very few Tories in the last couple of years, or I should say before and leading up to 2019, really worried about that so much. But now, we've got quotes like this, and this was tweeted out by Laura Coonsbury yesterday. She got it from a senior Downing Street source, and it was pretty incredible. There is a lot of concern inside the building about the PM. It's just not working. Cabinet needs to wake up and demand serious changes, otherwise it will keep getting worse. If they don't insist, he just won't do anything about it. Now,
can I ask you, what's the power structure in the Conservative Party? Because when a leader is seemingly losing his way, as Boris has been to my mind for some time, how does the he potentially transpire under him? Or, do we have a lot of sycophants here in the Conservative Party who are happy with the way things are because, it's such an eccentric leadership in the first place? How might this end up for Boris?
So in terms of the power structure, leaders in the Tory party do have a lot of power, and then it's donors, leaders and donors. When donors really start to get jittery, I think that's when people begin to worry. I should also add that the Conservatives are in government, which means that you do get more donors sticky on side for that influence. In terms of the power structure between the leader and MPs, you need 15% of MPs to put a letter into the 1922 committee for a leadership challenge. We're not close yet. Some, I think, have rumoured that they do that. There are 360 Tory MPs at the time of speaking, yes, even including some vacancies. And I don't think we're seeing that level yet. But I mean, in terms of how this will end up for Boris Johnson, usually badly if things aren't corrected. The Tories have never been shy about getting rid of leaders that they feel have become an anchor around them. Although with Johnson, there's a difference. He's got a majority no Tory leader has had in years, thinking decades. That changes the dynamic a bit, but doesn't mean that the Conservatives or senior Tories won't have their issues or their reservations about what's been happening recently.
What do you think actually happened here? Because by all accounts, he did make a visit to Peppa Pig World at the weekend. We got to remember he has young children. Now, this was part of his speech. He did have about a 20-second kind of shuffling of the papers aspect as well, where he was basically just frazzled and he asked the audience to just bear with him. But, this speech did seem to signify that even by Boris's standards, he's in a shaky place at the moment, maybe?
Yeah, he is. There's no doubt about it. And it's not just that, again, opposition forces are taking shots at him. He's feeling the internal pressure. And the internal pressure can sometimes be the thing that gets you. It can be the most uncomfortable thing. Regarding the Peppa Pig metaphor, on its own, actually, it's really quite a good one. It's understandable to most parents. It probably has a lot of cut through. It's a nice rhetorical device, but the delivery, again, and I have never been one of his, of the believers of Johnson as some sort of brilliant orator in church. I've never really understood that line of thinking. I think he uses these devices to distract from other things. But whether that will work, I think it worked yesterday in terms of kicking off the health and social care bill, or at least parts of the NHS debate from that. I didn't hear much from anywhere in terms of those discussions. But in terms of long term, I'm not quite sure it would have done the trick, mainly because people keep coming back to it, namely because it's uncomfortable for those inside the party, and also because the coverage, the press coverage from his speech was not great, even in the Tory papers. And the papers, again, have not been great reading for Johnson. These devices can work sometimes in terms of distracting, but if the focus is all on him and how much of a shambles he looks, and it doesn't really work out for the number 10 team.
Actually, just on that, so you mentioned his hero Churchill there, and he won't have been happy that you mentioned maybe an unfavorable, if very valid comparison between the pair of them. But bringing up Lenin was this was just extraordinary. I mean, for a conservative leader to bring, and he did obviously reference, well, I'm not saying I'm a political fan of Lenin, or I'm paraphrasing here, but I just thought that was extraordinary for him to bring Lenin into the speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd because I think he's been known to write his own speeches. And that
would add up.
Yeah, and sometimes it does work in the sense that people laugh at the stuff he says, and I think it can go down well for him. But there was such a lack of structure yesterday, and I think actually it's sort of a good metaphor for the Johnson premiership, moving from thing to thing. One priority one day, then here's the new thing the next, no structure, precious little attention to detail, I thought, and also I think in general a lack of control. Robert Peston wrote in his blog, and I think some of his blogs have been here, there and everywhere lately, but I think yesterday he made a good point that Johnson is a great campaigner. What that says about the political atmosphere at the moment, I'm not sure. Who you couldn't really imagine being a serious prime minister, and Keir Starmer, who we will talk about a bit later on, is the sort of person you could absolutely imagine being prime minister, but you don't know how he'd get there, which I think is fair. And also, we've discussed a lot about Peppa Pig World and whatever. We do need to go through some of the other highlights just quickly in that 20-minute keynote speech, because it was only 20 minutes, which was the incredible thing. This all happened in 20 minutes. He compared himself to Moses.
He did.
He pretended to be an accelerating car, which I have to...
Vroom, vroom.
Yeah, he did a vroom, vroom thing. He referred to himself in the third person when he was discussing, I think it was improvements in power at Battersea. Then, of course, there's the 30-second losing his place. And then, of course, there was the Peppa Pig World metaphor, which he used to take a swipe at the civil service and also the BBC. Just proving that some things never change. Moving on from that speech, just quickly, because there were a couple of other things which do have implications too, long term. Firstly, there's the health and social care bill. And I think there's two important factors to this. Number one, the changes made to Sir Andrew Dilnot's plan for social care reform, which leave people I think with less assets, much worse off, long story short. And there is a graphic going around, a very good graphic from the BBC. Unfortunately, I don't think I have permission to reproduce it here, but there are differences of hundreds of thousands of pounds for those with less assets. And I think that's going to have a big effect. We have to remember this was huge for Theresa May. It arguably played a central part in her 2017 general election campaign being derailed. The impact here won't be so sudden, but over the long term, it can be an attack line for Labour, and it can be something that Tory voters remember. We have to remember the people this is most designed to appeal to, and I think that's fair to say, are dyed-in-the-wool Tory voters. But as we've seen from the opinion polls, at this midterm stage, not all of them are sticking with Johnson. That some of them are going into the don't know column, less are going to other parties. That's a really, really important thing that's happened yesterday. The other thing I think I ought to mention, which I missed yesterday, was really important clauses on privatisation and representatives of healthcare boards. Why is this important? Well, number one, NHS is in a really long-term pressure crunch. Not enough doctors, not enough nurses, huge backlog. And even though we appear to be in a better place with COVID than last winter, especially as the booster rollout picks up pace, that is not much help if you have to wait behind 200 people for a GP assessment and other things going missed, whatever. If that can't be fixed long term, and these things rarely turn around until the spring of the next year after the winter, watch for that to become another buzzword, watch that to become another thing the government's under pressure over. And over time, these things, they can and they sometimes do count, which is why I think it's interesting to see these markets, these exit date markets moving.
You did mention donors as well. How important remain the Tory press?
Massive, massive, still very much massive. And interestingly, yesterday, Times editorial, very favourable towards Keir Starmer and his speech, which, to be honest with you, I found to be a bit dull, not dull, but I think it overcorrected a bit in terms of trying to be serious, which is something actually I noticed that the opposition sometimes do. They attempt to be very serious people, which doesn't, I think, come off quite as well as it does. But the media operation, or at least the media coverage, has been a lot better. And sometimes also, I saw a couple of people making the point that nobody was talking about Starmer's speech yesterday. I imagine for the opposition, that'll be just fine.
Absolutely.
That's fine. There is literally nothing wrong in British politics nowadays than just being out of the public
discourse, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. When things are going badly for one opposition, or for one prime minister, I should say, we should actually look at the Starmer odds, because he was 72 to be elected next prime minister, permanent prime minister for whatever reason. Interestingly, we've not yet seen lots of money for Starmer to be prime minister. I think that's people anticipating that Johnson may go beforehand and be replaced by, say, a Sunak or a Gove, and not Tory voters come back into the fold. But it is worth looking at his ratings. That they're getting better. They're not amazing, but by leader of the opposition standards, they're not terrible. There are plenty of criticism launched at Starmer, but one thing he doesn't get the tag of is the extremist tag, which was put on Jeremy Corbyn and somebody that he never managed to shake off. Again, things were stacked very much against him. It's incredibly difficult with the structure and the press especially, but for better or for worse, Starmer for now has avoided that big label. He is not seen as some sort of either communist in waiting or hideously dangerous monster or whatever.
Yeah, that is an interesting market. Sunak 11-4, Starmer 7-2, Michael Gove 15-2 to be the next prime minister. So as you say, there's obviously a lot of doubt about Johnson basically lasting out the next election into being leader. But in fairness to Starmer, I imagine, you know, as you say about publicity, good publicity and bad publicity, this is very damaging for Boris. There's only so much of this he can get away with. And yesterday was almost like people started questioning his well-being. And I think that might be a new level.
Yeah, definitely. I am loath to sort of rebroadcast things I've seen people saying on social media. I prefer there to be a science about this, but there are a number of people who are asking about his faculties. When I say faculties, I mean, some people are saying that, you know, he's on the sauce or whatever, or just they're wondering what's up in general. That's not the first time it's happened with Johnson. He has a way and an appearance about him that makes people scarcely believe he could be prime minister. But at the same time, it's more noticeable now. We could just be in the middle of a media moment. We could just be in the middle of a moment where things have lined up against him, but there are definitely still serious structural issues, which going forward will be difficult for any Tory leader to really gloss over. Let's not forget inflation, cost of living, that stuff bites, I think, harder over the coming months. Social care, there was a big Tory rebellion on it yesterday. I think 67 in total, and there were more abstentions. And then you do have, I think, the issue of delivery. But I'm talking, you know, in the years to come, but all that stuff, it can add up, because jumping ahead, let's say 2 years or so now, coming to the time of the next election, I think it is reasonably fair to say that attacks on the Labour Party in the same vein as 2019 will not land as well and will not stick as well. Whether it be Starmer still in place by them or anybody else, Labour will pick a leader who does not have, I think, the kind of past record that can be exploited by the press. Again, this is not a personal view on Jeremy Corbyn. This is just how things
it was.
Yeah. In the lead up to an election. And they also won't have the selling point of Brexit, I don't think, as an issue by then. But listen, that could change. We'll talk about that in the protocol lots more in future episodes, but that could change. They're going to need something to sell to the electorate. Levelling up, I think it had been hoped, would be that big thing, but that's just very dependent on what projects you're having where and how fast you can complete them. Infrastructure is big and it's complex, and it's tricky to get through, especially with the Treasury. And then you look elsewhere, and who knows how things will be by then, but selling that could be tricky. It could be very, very tricky to come up with an offer that appeals to the electorate in the same way that being very positive about Britain and going into the big wide world was in 2019, against, of course, an opposition leader who by then had his imagery.
Yeah, and obviously I suppose Jeremy Corbyn's own mess with Brexit didn't really help matters. But just before we finish up, the North Shropshire by-election is less than 4 weeks away now. So Conservatives are still 2-9 here, 3-1 Lib Dems.
Yeah, more money just trickling in for the Lib Dems. Markets are much wiser now to sort of the Lib Dem upset thing. And as I must say again, it is very different from what's happened down south, but it's not impossible to imagine them getting an awful lot closer. Even if you replicated it basically off the national votes at the time when we had the by-elections in the summer, it will be a lot tighter anyway. The Lib Dems are doing better in the polls recently. Getting cut through is a bit more difficult for them, and they are focused, or they are going to have to focus on getting an older, more traditionally conservative population to make that jump. But it's not impossible. They've got a good run up. The Tories have almost no good press there at the moment, and the candidate has experience of running there locally. So it would not be out of the ordinary. It wouldn't be extraordinary, I don't think. It's possible. Whether I'd want to take 3-1 about it, I'd be in two minds. I probably want to see some local polling, but I think it's on. I definitely think the upset to a point is on, even though I do believe the Conservatives will retain that seat, and they'll also retain Old Bexley and Sidcup.
Yeah, 20s on. You'd imagine that in all circumstances that is a formality, but
Yeah.
North Shropshire, I don't know. This is going to be interesting. Will the Conservative voter even want to be seen to be voting Conservative at the moment? Want to be seen in public if you're a big Boris Johnson fan? Because just to end up, it's embarrassing, really. And this is from looking from a perspective of not living in Britain or whatever. I think if a leader in Ireland behaved anyway like this, it'd be impossible for him to actually continue.
Yeah, there's definitely, I'm noticing a sort of different standard in sort of recent years, in sort of what countries will accept different political figures. You know, it was very hard to imagine a Micheál Martin or Aurélien Varadkar sort of getting away with, say, even one Johnson week.
Yeah.
And for most leaders on the continent as well. And it might be a replication of the culture thing. It might be differences in culture and historical backgrounds, I think, have a lot to do with this. You know, different histories can produce different, you know, types of political leaders. I think there's always been, this is coming from the UK, but the way I've seen it, there's always been a certain seriousness to every Taoiseach I've seen.
Well, I didn't think it was any different in the UK. I mean, you've had like polarizing figures like Margaret Thatcher and so on, but you know, up to John Major, subsequent to that, Tony Blair. You may disagree with these characters, but at the same time, we've never seen anything like this.
No, true. But again, that's sometimes just how politics are like. It'd be the same in America. You know, you'd never have had a president like Trump.
But they came along at the same time for a good reason.
Yeah, and there is absolutely a realignment, especially in certain countries where I think maybe I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but maybe possibly the access or the systems are a bit weaker at defending against this sort of thing. You know, you can, if you've got enough money, you can jump into the GOP in America. You can likely do the same for the Conservatives here, plus also Johnson's long media history, etc., had built up a public image, which made, I think, a lot of this possible. And going forward, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because you have Zemmour in France, which we'll be covering more over the next few months, and he's now leading Le Pen in a number of polls, including a number of Harris polls. And yeah, I think there's a lot more to come on that front.
Yeah, that was the polling station. If nothing else, Boris has given us plenty to chat about. Thank you, William.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, check out the website for those revised odds. Boris, basically, if you're taking on Boris in these polls, basically the prices are contracting. 6-4 now into 11-8 is perhaps the most notable. We'll be back next week.